Hey, everybody. It's the Jimmy Dore Show. I'm Aaron Maté here with Americans comedian Kurt Metzger. And remember headlines like this? How Russia helped swing the election for Trump. A meticulous analysis of online activity during the 2016 campaign makes a powerful case that targeted cyber attacks by hackers and trolls were decisive.
That's actually toned down from the thing that people actually said directly, which is like, Russia hacked the election.
Yes.
And I would go, what do you mean? They hacked the machine? they used. I'm like, you think all these people are going to vote for Hillary? And then this is what I would say to them. And they just focused on they hacked the they interfered. That was the word.
Yes. So headlines like this were commonplace after Trump's victory, where Russian trolls had brainwashed millions of Americans on social media into not voting for Hillary Clinton and electing Trump. Well, guess what we get? I don't know, 6 years later. Here's this new headline from the Washington Post. Russian trolls on Twitter had little influence on 2016 voters.
Well, they did just a little more meticulous research than the meticulous research she said in the...
Here it is. Russian influence operations on Twitter in the 2016 presidential election reached relatively few users, most of whom were highly partisan Republicans. And the Russian accounts had no measurable impact in changing minds or influencing voter behavior, according to a study. Now, notice how even the first sentence contradicts the headline. The headline says Russian trolls had little influence, right, in 2016, which implies they had some influence. Well, the sentence right here says they actually had no measurable impact in changing minds or influencing voter behavior.
You're not supposed to keep reading after the
headline. Key findings of the report: only 1% of Twitter users accounted for 70% of the exposure to accounts that Twitter identified as Russian troll accounts. Highly partisan Republicans were exposed to 9 times more posts than non-Republicans. More key findings: content from the news media and U.S. politicians dwarfed the amount of Russian influence content the electorate was exposed to during the 2016 race. There was no measurable impact on political attitudes, polarization, and vote preferences and behavior from the Russian accounts.
How did anyone think that? Like, how did anyone think that there's all these people that would have voted for Hillary but switched to Trump? How would you ever think that?
Because they were in a cult called Blue Anon. And Blue Anon, to explain an unwelcome development, which was Hillary losing, had to find an excuse. And one of them was to blame Russian social media posts.
I mean, even the people at the time were like, it's not that Hillary's so great. There's a whole bunch of people I knew that were all in showbiz and they're like, but come on, not Trump. I know you don't like Hillary. And then afterwards we're like, we're treating this lesser of two evil as if like Christ was just re-crucified.
Oh yeah. My personal sense coming out of this is that this got way overhyped. Josh Tucker, one of the report's authors, who's also the co-director of the New York University Center, said about the meaningfulness of the Russian tweets.
This is like Spider sense in full reverse. You're like, Spidey had a sense ahead of time, like 7 to 10 years after. Oh, you're getting a tingle.
But of course, because this is the Washington Post, they have to cover themselves and still pay lip service to Russiagate. So here's what they say. But the study doesn't go so far as to say that Russia had no influence on people who voted for Trump. It doesn't examine other social media, like the much larger Facebook. And this is what they say about Facebook. Additionally, the study estimates potentially 32 million people were exposed to Russian-sponsored tweets on Twitter, whereas Facebook estimated that 126 million users potentially viewed Russian-sponsored tweets.
Do we have a vaccine yet? For exposure to Russian tweets?
Well, so here's a headline. This is an example. So this figure gets spread around a lot. Russian influence reached 126 million through Facebook alone. That was the headline for the New York Times back in 2017.
They pass a law.
How many more people is that than like Jimmy Fallon or Colbert reaches?
But even so, look, even that figure of 126 million, it's a complete lie. It's fake news. And we know this because there were studies put up by the Senate a long time ago, which few people actually read, but I was one of the few people who did. And I wrote about this back in 2018. And I wrote an article in The Nation magazine called "New Studies Show Pundits Are Wrong About Russian Social Media Involvement in U.S. Politics." And what I did was just looked at what the Senate's own studies said. And this is what I found. The Senate Commission reports from the University of Oxford and the firm New Knowledge.
New Knowledge. That's it. That's that.
Who've been very busy, do provide the most thorough look at Russian social media activity to date. The authors scrutinized the output of the Internet Research Agency, the Russian clickbait firm indicted by Mueller in February 2018. On every significant metric, it is difficult to square the data with the dramatic conclusions that have been drawn. And that's my polite way of saying that this is all bullshit. When it comes to Facebook, check this out. The studies repeat the widespread claim that Russian posts reached 126 million people on Facebook. But that is in fact a spin on Facebook's own guess. This is what Facebook actually said. When Colin Stretch, who is a Facebook executive, testified to Congress in 2017, he says, our best estimate is that approximately 126 million people may have been served one of these IRA stories at some time during a 2-year period between 2015 and 2017.
Now we know how he got the name Stretch. It's a bit of a stretch.
According to Stretch, posts generated by suspected Russian accounts showing up in Facebook's newsfeed amounted to approximately 1 out of 23,000 pieces of content.
There is no firm, like, suspected, may have been. There's not any firm language in any part of that.
No, of course, it's all it's may have been exposed to this content once over a 2-year period, but that's not how the New York Times and the rest of the establishment media reported. They said that Russian influencer reached 126 million through Facebook alone. And there were a million headlines like this because this was not a Russian interference campaign. This was a Russiagate interference campaign to make people scared of social media memes on Facebook when there was no evidence for it at all.
Else? I'll bet you, like how with LSD, remember, what was the CIA project where they just drugged people with LSD?
Oh, yeah.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it is, but that, like, Russians are doing this.
Yes.
So we got to see if we can control people with LSD, their mind, because Russians are going to get it. So this nonsense of like Russia changed a vote, this like dumb scam, like I'm sure somebody's got a program to on all the great social media things we see now. I'll bet you it's like the equivalent of LSD. Like we've got to start controlling people's minds with social media.
Hell yeah. And who came up with this theory that these Russian posts brainwash people? It wasn't Twitter, it wasn't Facebook, it was Democratic operatives who then pressured Twitter and Facebook to validate their theories that they concocted. And that's newly revealed in the Twitter files and the Facebook revelations were known before. So this was another Democratic Party conspiracy theory.
Who was the blonde that was they call it the Facebook whistleblower?
Oh, yes. Yes.
She wasn't blowing whistle on, them stealing your information. Anything. It's all about they were influencing people.
They're helping the bad guys. Yeah. They're helping Iran. Yeah, that was a complete scam.
Yeah.
Funded actually in part by Pierre Omidyar, who's the billionaire who owns The Intercept. So yeah, that was an information
I always
operation.
forget his name.
Yeah. Here's more from Colin Stretch of Facebook. Just 11%, and these studies put up by the Senate, just 11% of the total content attributed to the Internet Research Agency, this Russian troll farm, and 33% of user engagement with it was related to the election. The posts were minimally about the candidates, with roughly 6% of tweets, 18% of Instagram posts, and 7% of Facebook posts having mentioned Trump or Clinton by name.
What were the other majority of them of? Oh, you showed him. It was just like a picture of a bear.
We're going to see some. We're going to see some in a second. Also hurting the case that the Russians reached a large number of Americans is that they spent such a microscopic amount of money. Oxford puts the Internet Research Agency's Facebook spending between 2015 and 2017 at just $73,000. As was previously known, about $46,000 was spent on Russian-linked Facebook ads before the 2016 election.
Well, once we get Trump's tax returns, we'll see the rest of the funding.
So here's what's funny about this story. So here's that story we're covering from the Washington Post, where they're now admitting that Russian trolls on Twitter had little influence on 2016 voters. And of course, that's even a stretch because it actually was no influence, not little. But the author's name is Tim Starks. Yeah. Okay, that's his name.
He looks like he's wearing a fake beard in that picture. Like he put on a fake beard to buy beer.
So that's Tim Starks now, right? Okay. This is Tim Starks back during the height of Russiagate. Russia's manipulation of Twitter was far vaster than believed.
I wish there was a picture of him with all his hair right there.
So there's a comparison before and after. So
it's
now
infamous troll farm.
And here's Caitlin Johnstone. It's the same guy. It's the same fucking guy. But let's remember what this was turned into and the hysteria that Blue Anon pundits made out of this. And this is just a small sample.
But the important thing here is that Bernie Sanders lovers page run out of Albania, it's still there, still running, still operating, still churning this stuff out. Now.
Wait.
This is not part of American politics.
Not normal.
This is not, partisan warfare between Republicans and Democrats. This is international warfare against our country.
If we ever got a story wrong that big, we'd be laughed out of the business.
Do you know, like, the fear of this influence from everything from your Andrew Tates to your Alex Jones to whatever? What do you think? Is there anything more influential than giving somebody $1 billion? Like, Rachel Maddow, what does she get a week? Like 30 grand or 80? Something crazy.
She made $30,000 a day up until her last contract. Now I think it's like 100.
100 grand a day. You don't think that's a lot of influence that maybe he's making pure shit come out of her mouth? And for that amount of money, I might be willing to act too, like how she is, do a fake cry and you guys, I'll put you guys.
Here's more. This is Gerald Nadler responding after Mueller indicted those Russian troll farmers. And this is what Gerald Nadler said.
Imagine if FDR had denied that the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor and didn't react. That's the equivalent.
Well, it's a bit of a different thing. I mean,
no, it's not.
They didn't kill anyone.
They didn't kill anyone, but they're destroying our country.
Do you really think it's on? You think it's on par?
Not in the amount of violence, but I think in the seriousness, it is very much on par. This country exists to have a democratic system with a small d. That's what the country's all about. And this is an attempt to destroy that.
We have been invaded in such a subtle way.
This is actor and Jimmy Dore fan favorite, Rob Reiner.
Because we don't see planes hitting the buildings. We don't see bombs dropping in Pearl Harbor. But we have been invaded, as Malcolm points out. We are under attack, but we don't feel it. But it's like walking around with high blood pressure, and then all of a sudden you're not aware of it and you drop dead. So it's insidious, and it has affected our bloodstream. And if we don't do something about it, and that's why, guys like John Brennan and James Clapper are running around with their hair on fire, because they're trying to wake people up to tell them that we have to do something about it. We have to protect ourselves. And if we don't, our 241 years of democracy and self-governance will start to collapse.
Did Rob Reiner just say that our democracy is looking fat and puffy and unhealthy? It's trying to grow a beard to cover its weak chin.
So, just to give you an illustration of how dangerous this was, okay? As everybody was going on TV, on MSNBC and CNN, freaking out about Russian memes on Facebook and Twitter that weren't even about the election, things like this were happening. The same president they were accusing of being blind to Russian interference and being an asset of Russia was doing things like this. Trump says the U.S. will withdraw from nuclear arms treaty with Russia. Experts warn of the most severe crisis in nuclear arms control since the 1980s as Trump confirms U.S. will leave INF agreement. And that's from October 2018.
So some good did come from this.
But the problem is Trump doing things like that was very inconvenient for Blue Anon pundits who were obsessed with the idea that he was blind to Russian interference and that he was a conspirator of Russia. So their conspiracy theory incentivized them to ignore developments like this, such as Trump causing the most severe crisis in nuclear arms control since the 1980s. So check out what they did when they had to acknowledge that this was going on. What they did was they buried it in coverage of the important story, which was Trump not standing up to Russian interference. So here's Chris Hayes and how he handles the fact that Trump has just killed a vital nuclear arms control treaty with Russia.
Today, National Security Advisor John Bolton took a interesting approach to Russian interference in the presidential election. While in Moscow to discuss U.S. withdrawal from the nuclear weapons treaty, he told the Russian radio station, quote, "The point I made to Russian colleagues today was that I didn't think whatever they had done in terms of meddling in the 2016 election, that they had any effect on it. But what they have had an effect on the U.S. is to sow enormous distrust of Russia."
See what he did there? He's talking about Bolton's comments about Russian interference in the election. And he mentions, in passing, what was Bolton doing? Oh, yeah, he was just withdrawing from a vital nuclear arms control treaty. Let's play it again.
I didn't
watch
even
what
hear
he
him
does.
mention the
Yeah, watch
treaty.
it. He says it so quickly, just in passing.
Today, National Security Advisor John Bolton took an interesting approach to Russian interference in the presidential election. While in Moscow to discuss U.S. withdrawal from the nuclear weapons treaty, he
See how fast he says that? Well, in Moscow to discuss Trump's withdrawal from nuclear weapons treaty. That's nothing. Who cares? Big deal.
What the fuck?
So that's how they handled it. And here's Adam Schiff that same week talking about really Trump's failure to stand up to Russia. As Trump is tearing up nuclear weapons treaties with Russia, here's Adam Schiff on what Trump is really doing.
That John Bolton, with that newly unsealed indictment, would have to bring it up, would have to confront the Russians about this. He couldn't not.
The indictment she's mentioned, that's the indictment of a bookkeeper who worked for that Russian troll farm. Okay. And that is their biggest deal right now. Okay. Right after Trump just pulled out of the INF treaty, which basically allows the US and Russia to build up a whole new class of nuclear weapons. This is what they're talking about.
Again, the common wisdom is wrong. I feel like I'm watching an incredibly dramatic situation here, teed up by the Justice Department and blown off by the White House. How do you see it?
I see it much the same way. It's really breathtaking. When the ink was barely dry on the latest indictment of a Russian working for an oligarch, as you say, close to Putin, we have this
She was literally the accountant for this troll farm. that's what they're talking about. And the indictment is about her bookkeeping and whether or not she properly kept records of all the spending they did on.
She was quickened, much like the
of the National Security Advisor of the United States basically telling his counterparts, that interference you did in the last election, I don't really think it did very much. Basically communicating to Putin. Putin has to walk away from this thinking, this weak U.S. president will never confront me. He doesn't have the guts to confront me. This National Security Advisor certainly doesn't. I have essentially carte blanche in the midterms. As long as what I do helps the president's party, he will not only not call me out, he may be grateful for it. That's basically the message that John Bolton delivered. And it is so damaging to the national interest. It's breathtaking.
It's breathtaking that John Bolton is just staying in neocon and not joining us here in neo-lib, where we still going to have nuclear thing.
Trump just tore up this vital nuclear treaty with Russia, one of the most reckless moves I think you could do when it comes to Russia, because this meant that there was going to be a whole new nuclear arms race, as that Guardian headline talked about. And right after that, the Trump administration tested a intercontinental missile that had been banned before. Very provocative, very dangerous. And these people are saying that Trump is a weakling who's not standing up to Putin because they don't want to look at what he's actually doing. They don't want to look at his actual policies. They want to pretend that he's compromised by Russia and that Russian memes on Facebook are more important than nuclear weapons.
We need to update our nuclear arsenal, Aaron.
Now, here's the one time some facts were allowed on MSNBC. One time they allowed on a guest, his name is Adrian Chen, who wrote an article well before Russiagate on this Russian troll farm. And he made the mistake of being honest on MSNBC. And this is what he said.
It's of my personal belief that it isn't all of that effective. It's essentially a social media marketing campaign with 90 people, a couple $1 million, a few $1 million behind it, run by people who have, a bare grasp of the English language and not a full understanding of who they're targeting, what they're targeting. I think if you think about that in terms of just a normal marketing campaign, that's not going to be a very good bang for your buck. I think that the paranoia aspect, right? The idea that there is this, kind of all-powerful or immense propaganda machine that's going on, and that anybody who's tweeting something that you don't like or is kind of causing trouble on the internet can be chalked up to Russia. That is a very powerful thing that's going on and is really increasing now, I think, in the wake of these indictments in kind of a worrying way. There's not a lot of people saying, well, let's hold back, maybe it's not all of that big of a deal.
Adrian Chen and Rosalind Hilderman, thanks for making the time tonight.
Adrian Chen, shut the fuck up.
That's right.
Well, they're going to put him in a room where the walls literally close in on him.
Here's Glenn Greenwald reacting to this Washington Post article. You don't say Russiagate was and is one of the most deranged and unhinged conspiracy theories in modern times. It wasn't spread by QAnon or 4chan users, but the vast majority of media corporations, scholars, think tank frauds, and NYT NBC's disinformation units. Here's Matt Taibbi. How interesting that this is coming out now. Will the Washington Post address the countless stories they wrote hyping Russian influence on the 2016 race, the Pulitzers they won for such coverage? Yes. Oh, yeah. They won Pulitzers for this.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Handed out Pulitzer book deals.
There's a lot of books. My aunt was like, you got to read this book. And I'm like, oh, God. Have you ever seen a meme? No, never.
Here's The Intercept finally getting the memo. Those Russian Twitter bots didn't do shit in 2016, says new study. Yeah, no shit, The Intercept, except The Intercept took 6 years to make that realization.
Yes. Where is this new study?
It was put out by NYU. And because NYU says it, then the Washington Post is allowed to print it. When people like me and Jimmy Dore were saying it, no, you can't listen to us. But all we were doing was just reporting on what was in the Senate's own studies.
Yeah. Well, now NYU said it, so I guess that's the science, basically. Well, is NYU.
Hey, JD.
Not only that, but they admitted in 2017 the head of CrowdStrike, which was the company that was charged with going and trying to find the Russians hacking into the DNC server. And of course they couldn't. In fact, they admitted it in testimony to Congress, sealed, secret testimony to Congress, that they did. In fact, they were not able to find any trace of Russia doing anything with the DNC server. They had no evidence of that whatsoever. Adam Schiff knew that, and so they sat on that information for years. They never told anybody that, right? And how did we find out about it?
That's correct. So the testimony from CrowdStrike, which is the firm that the first entity that said that Russia hacked the DNC, was CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is a contractor working for Hillary Clinton, and they made that allegation. And then in December 2017, as you say, they testified to Congress. Oh, actually, we have no evidence of that, and we didn't find out about that until May 2020, so 2 years after the Mueller probe, or 1 year after the Mueller probe shut down, is when we finally found out that, oh, actually, they had no evidence for it. So because Adam Schiff had that testimony, but he refused to release it until he was forced to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you go to Chris Hayes' Wikipedia page or Rachel Maddow's, it doesn't say that they're conspiracy theorists. It does. It's not going to say that. It doesn't say that they got the biggest story of their life wrong repeatedly every day at the top of their lungs.
Well, it's not like they write it for themselves. Somebody else is giving them the thing. They just read it.
It won't, but if you go to my Wikipedia page, it will say things about me that are factually incorrect. It still says that we got it wrong, that we spread conspiracy theories about Syria gas attacks. No, we debunked those conspiracy theories. That's the difference. We should get those. We should get that T-shirt. Let somebody please make a conspiracy analyst.
I don't understand why conspiracy theory, like
the conspiracies. People get charged with conspiracies to commit crime every day in every court in America.
It's not like a thing of that's a crazy conspiracy. Now that's a thing if you would say that conspiracy theory is crazy,
right?
But just the in and of itself, what do you think? Nothing has ever been a conspiracy. Why do we have the word then?
That's right. Well, I love. Anyway, okay, back to you. Everybody, we're doing live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles in January and February in Los Angeles. And then we're going to Tempe, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Nashville. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets and become a premium member while you're there.